Hi guys, this is Mrs. Pickard, and before we read our excerpt from Fahrenheit 451, we need to go ahead and go over our standard and learning target and a few terms for this activity. So if you would go ahead and follow along on your paper and write down the same notes that I do, you will submit these notes in Schoology for a grade, so please make sure that you are following along. Our standard that we're working on is RL 1.1. And that is cite several pieces of textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. If you are not finished writing at any time, remember you can always pause the video until you are finished and then you can continue. Our learning target is to draw conclusions about characters, theme, and situations based on analysis of textual details. And our task that we are going to work on today is to annotate the excerpt of Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury with Mrs. Pickard, that's me, based on our standard and learning target. Alright, some key terms that we need to go over before we start reading are inferences, implicit, and explicit. Inferences are an assumption about character, theme, or the story in general, like the plot, right? Based on evidence. So your inference has to be based on some piece of evidence that made you have that assumption or that guess about what's going to happen in the story. Now your evidence could be either implicit evidence or explicit evidence. Implicit evidence is indirectly stated, not obvious. The author may imply and the reader must infer. So implicit evidence is indirectly stated in the text, it is not obvious, and the author may imply and the reader must infer. That means that you need to dig a little deeper, and it's not going to be clear when you first read something implicit evidence means that you may need to guess a little bit, dig deeper. Explicit evidence is directly stated. It is obvious. The author gives the reader the info without needing to infer. All right, now at this point, I would like you to make a prediction about what you think this text is going to be about. So remember, I said that the title is Fahrenheit 451. That's a novel. And what you know about the word Fahrenheit, what do you think this text might be about? Go ahead and write that information right here. All right, so now when we are annotating, we need to make a key at the top of our paper. So you need a pen or pencil and 2 highlighters or 2 colored pencils. You do not have to have the same colors that I have, but you do need to have a key at the top so that when I look at your annotations, I can tell which color goes with which item. So at the top for our key, I'm going to put a star and write inferences. Then I'm going to write implicit evidence, and I'm going to make implicit evidence my yellow highlighter color. And then for my green highlighter, that's going to be our explicit evidence. All right, so we're going to go ahead and read the first section, and when we are reading, we're going to pause to make inferences to the side and then try to determine if our inferences are based on implicit evidence or explicit evidence. If you need to, you can make a note to yourself that implicit is not obvious and explicit is obvious. Or you can also write that implicit is not directly stated and explicit is directly stated. Whatever's going to help you remember the difference between the two. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with the great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. All right, we're going to stop right here and try to make an inference. So far, I want you to try to think about what you think this story is talking about. We have words that can help us with that inference, such as burn, blackened, nozzle, kerosene, and again, we also have burning and charcoal ruins of history. So I want you to make an inference to the side. And my inference is going to be pretty simple right now. And I'm going to say the narrator likes burning things. And I know that from the explicit evidence, it was a pleasure to burn. And then we also have implicit evidence of venomous kerosene upon the world, or to see things blackened and changed. Now, I'm also going to make an inference about this phrase, charcoaled ruins of history. And I'm going to make it on this side. So it seems like the author is now using burning as some sort of metaphor, charcoal ruins of history. So I'm going to make an inference to say something about history is burned. So I made an inference to say history is burned. Now I'm not really sure why history will be burned, but maybe we'll find out if we keep reading. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted, above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind-turned dark night with burning. All right, so now we can make another inference based on this section. And again, we have more evidence for burning. He flicked the igniter and the house jumped up in a gorging fire. We don't really have to dig deeper in that. That tells us that our narrator did what? Tells us that our narrator just burned a house, right? As a reader, I'm thinking, why would our narrator be burning a house down? Why would a narrator be burning the house down? It tells us he wanted, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace. Okay. While the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Now I'm going to make an inference here. I'm seeing a lot about books. I'm going to make the inference that this idea of history is burned, maybe he's burning books from the past. That's what I'm thinking right now as a reader. Maybe he's burning books from the past. If your inferences or your notes look a little different than mine, that's okay. I want to see what you are thinking about as you are reading this. All right, this excerpt is a little later on in the book, and Montag is the main character. Montag's hand, closed like a mouth, crushed the book with wild devotion, with an insanity of mindlessness to his chest. The men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below like a small girl among the bodies. Montag had done nothing. His hand had done it all. His hand, with a brain of its own, with a conscience and a curiosity in each trembling finger, had turned thief. Now it plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to sweating armpit, rushed out empty with a magician's flourish. "Look here, innocent, look here." He gazed, shaken, at that white hand. He held it way out, as if he were farsighted. He held it close, as if he were blind. "Montag!" he jerked about. "Don't stand there, idiot!" The books lay like great mounds of fishes left to dry. The men danced and slipped and fell over them. Titles glittered their golden eyes, falling, gone. All right, we're gonna stop right here. In this section, one of our inferences could be that the woman owns the books and the burning house. We don't have a name for her yet, but it says the woman stood below. And again, we don't just have Montag. It says the men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. So this sentence right here explicitly tells us what the men are doing, but we can infer that Montag is part of a team burning books. We don't really know why, but that seems to be what they're doing, right? And when it says they fell like slaughtered birds, it's talking about the books, the magazines, both of them. Fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below like a small girl among the bodies. When it says the woman stood below, that's our implicit evidence to infer that she must own the books and the burning house, right? It may seem like it's explicitly stated the woman stood below, but the author didn't explicitly tell us that she owns the house or the books. We had to infer that. And then it says Montag had done nothing. His hand had done it all, his hand with a brain of its own, with a conscience and a curiosity in each trembling finger, had turned thief. Now it plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to sweating armpit. Okay, this part seems different. Now it kind of seems like Montag, I'm writing, is Montag taking a book? It seems like these books are bad if they're burning them, but it seems like Montag is taking a book, right? It says his hand had done it all, with a brain of its own, a conscience and curiosity, had turned thief. And then it says, plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to his armpit, and ran out. And then we have a couple people talking to Montag, saying, don't just stand there, you need to help. You need to help burn these books. Pause if you didn't get the notes. And if you're ready, we're gonna move on right here. Kerosene. They pumped the cold fluid from the numbered 451 tanks strapped to their shoulders. They coated each book. They pumped rooms full of it. They hurried downstairs. Montag staggered after them in the kerosene fumes. Come on, woman. The woman knelt among the books, touching the drenched leather and cardboard, reading the gilt titles with her fingers while her eyes accused Montag. You can't ever have my books, she said. You know the law, said Beatty. Where's your common sense? None of those books agree with each other. You've been locked up here for years. All right, so again, before we move on to the next page, we have more evidence that these people are taking these books from this woman. We still don't really know why, but she says, you can't have my books. And then Beatty says something about it's the law, right? So we can infer that in this world, people are not allowed to own or even read books. That's our inference. What I want you to answer is why. Why do you think that they're not allowed to own or read books? Put that answer right here, and I'll be looking for that in your annotations that you post in Schoology. You've been locked up here for years with a regular damned Tower of Babel. Snap out of it. The people in those books never lived. Come on now. All right, so the Tower of Babel is a biblical illusion. And the word Babel means like confused, noise, even like incoherent. Like you say a baby is babbling, right? You can't really understand what they're saying. Essentially, this character is saying that she is confused, she's incoherent, or even defiant. If you look up the biblical illusion, Tower of Babel, you will see that it kind of has to do with a rebellious side. So this character is rebelling or defiant. She's not cooperating. Then we have more evidence about what's happening in this world right now, because it says the people in those books never lived. So, the people in those books never lived. That leads me to think, are these fictional stories? Can they only read nonfiction? Or do they think that everything written is a lie? What are they being told? Why are they not being able to read? That's what's going through my head right now. She shook her head. The whole house is going up, said Beatty. This is explicit evidence that they are burning her house. The men walked clumsily to the door. They glanced back at Montag, who stood near the woman. You're not leaving her there, he protested. She won't come. Force her then. Beatty raised his hand, in which was concealed the igniter. We're due back at the house. Besides, these fanatics always try this. The pattern's familiar. Montag placed his hand on the woman's elbow. You can come with me. No, she said. Thank you anyway. All right, so we have evidence here that Montag has compassion for this woman, right? Montag has empathy or compassion for the woman. We can also infer that he's having an internal conflict. I want you to write what two things is he having an internal conflict about? The character Montag, how is he conflicted? I'll be checking to see if you answered this question right here. But moving forward, so Montag said, You can come with me." "No," she said. "Thank you anyway." So, I'm going to infer she doesn't want to leave her house or books. "I'm counting to 10, said Beatty. 1, 2. "Please," said Montag. "Go on," said the woman. 3, 4. "Here." Montag pulled at the woman. The woman replied quietly, "I want to stay here." 5, 6. "You can stop counting," she said. She opened the fingers of one hand slightly, and in the palm of the hand was a single slender object, an ordinary kitchen match. The sight of it rushed the men out and down away from the house. Captain Beatty, keeping his dignity, backed slowly through the front door, his pink face burnt and shiny from 1,000 fires and night excitements. God, thought Montag, how true. Always at night the alarm comes, never by day. Is it because the fire is prettier by night? All right, so what I want you to do is find one piece of implicit evidence, find one piece of explicit evidence to support an inference or claim about this last section right here. All right, the last thing that I want you to do is answer these 2 questions. If you have room at the bottom of your annotations, you can answer them here or on the back of your page, as long as you submit it to Schoology. So number 1, why does the author Ray Bradbury include both explicit and implicit information? And number 2, why do you think books are banned in this world? Use one piece of evidence to support your analysis, and let me know if that piece of evidence is explicit or implicit information. So again, I want you to answer these 2 questions on your annotations paper or on the back, and make sure that you include your responses to these questions when you submit your annotations assignment.